The chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wider than any cathedral humanity had ever built, and today it buzzed with the voices of 200 species, all talking at once about laws and treaties and trade agreements that would bore anyone to tears. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the human podium, with his hands clasped behind his back, listening to a delegate from the Morthine Collective complain about human shipping routes through their territory for what felt like the 100th time this session. And furthermore, the Morthine chittered through its translator, humanity refuses to abide by standard cargo inspection protocols. We abide by every protocol, Chen interrupted smoothly. We simply don't allow biological matter to be transported through our shipping lanes without verification of sentient status. The chamber fell quiet. A massive being from the Haravak Unity, all 6 arms crossed over its chitinous chest, spoke up with a voice like grinding stones. The humans and their obsession continues, Chen said calmly. It's the law. One law, chirped a small avian representative. In 200 years of membership in this council, humanity has proposed exactly one universal law, while the rest of us maintain thousands. Chen smiled that diplomatic smile he'd perfected over decades of service. We find that quality matters more than quantity. Standing in the security alcove, above the chamber floor, Commander Sarah Okonkwo listened to the exchange with half her attention, while the other half monitored the security feeds, showing every entrance and exit. Her grandmother used to say that Sarah had inherited her ability to watch everything at once from their father's side of the family. But Sarah thought it was just training and paranoia working together like a well-oiled machine. Down below, Chen was warming to his subject now. My esteemed colleagues seem confused about why humanity maintains only one universal law, while accepting that different cultures need different rules. Enlighten us, the Zhen delegate said from his position at the high podium reserved for the ancient empires. Sarah's attention sharpened. The Zhen sovereignty was old, older than human civilization by thousands of years, and they carried themselves with the arrogance of those who had never truly been challenged. Our law is simple, Chen said. No sapient being shall be held as property. Yes, yes, the Zhen delegate waved a clawed hand dismissively. We've all heard humanity's quaint moral position on resource allocation. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but kept her expression neutral as her training demanded. Resource allocation, Chen repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it now? The Morthine delegate chittered nervously. Perhaps we should move on to the trade disputes. No, Chen said, and his voice had gone cold in a way that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. I think we need to be very clear about what humanity means when we say this is our only law. He touched the podium controls, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber, showing Earth as it had been 300 years ago, during what historians called the Corporate Wars. This is our world before we unified, Chen said quietly. Do you see those red zones? The chamber was silent. Those were corporate territories where human beings were bought and sold as assets, where children were born into debt that could never be repaid, and their labor was owned by entities that treated them as equipment. Sarah had heard this speech before, but it still made something cold settle in her stomach, because her grandmother had been born in one of those red zones, had spent the first 20 years of her life working in factories where the air was poison and the quotas were impossible. It took us 50 years of warfare to end that system, Chen continued. 50 years of humans killing humans to establish one simple principle. People are not property. Your species' internal struggles are not the concern of this council, the Zhen delegate said with clear disdain in his voice. They became the galaxy's concern when we joined it, Chen replied, and we made our position clear from the beginning. We would trade with any species, negotiate with any culture, respect any tradition, except one. Your law is impractical, the Haravak representative rumbled. Many species have different concepts of individual autonomy. Then they can explain those concepts to us, and we'll find accommodation," Chen interrupted. "But the moment someone claims ownership of a thinking, feeling being, the moment they put chains on someone who can understand what chains are, that's where humanity draws its line." Sarah watched the Zhen delegate's face, or what passed for a face among his species. Saw something calculating in those multifaceted eyes. "How admirably idealistic," the Zhen said. "One wonders what humanity would do if this line were crossed." The question hung in the air, like a blade. Chen met the Zhen's gaze without blinking. "I suggest we never find out." The session broke for recess after that, and Sarah made her way down to the human delegation offices, where Chen was already pouring himself coffee that smelled strong enough to strip paint. "That was pointed," Sarah said. "The Zhen have been pushing boundaries for months," Chen replied. "Intelligence suggests they've been acquiring human salvage from ships that go missing near their borders." Sarah felt something cold slide down her spine. "Their legal term for crew and passengers recovered from disabled vessels," Chen said bitterly. "They argue that rescue operations entitle them to compensation through labor contracts." "Labor contracts," Sarah repeated, tasting the euphemism. "Slavery by another name," Chen nodded. "But they're careful. They only target ships from non-council species or those who can't prove citizenship. We need to—" The alert came through on every console simultaneously, a Priority 1 distress signal from the colony ship New Providence, carrying 200,000 settlers to the Kepler system. Sarah's fingers flew across her datapad, pulling up the ship's last known coordinates, and then her blood turned to ice. "They were passing through the disputed zone," she said quietly. Chen was already on the comm to Fleet Command. "This is Ambassador Chen requesting immediate military response to—" The second alert came through before he could finish. The New Providence had gone silent. For 6 hours they waited, while every available human ship in 3 sectors burned toward the last known position. And Sarah stood in the command center, watching the screens. With her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles went white. When the report came through, it was short and devastating. Debris field consistent with forced boarding, no survivors recovered, and one piece of evidence that made Sarah's vision go red at the edges. A Zen sovereignty marker beacon claiming salvage rights. 200,000 people, Chen said quietly, and his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Sarah looked at him and saw that his diplomatic mask had finally cracked, revealing the anger underneath. "What do we do?" Chen was quiet for a long moment before he reached for the comm. "Get me the Security Council, all of them, and then get me the President." "Sir?" "We made one law," Chen said, and his voice was steady now, cold and steady like a blade being drawn. "Just one law, and they broke it." Sarah understood then what was about to happen and felt no satisfaction in being right about the Zen delegates calculating. Humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what happened when you cross their only line. In the Zhen sovereignty capital, the Empress received news of the salvage operation with satisfaction. 200,000 workers would be valuable assets for the border colonies. Her military advisors assured her that humanity would lodge formal protests and perhaps implement trade sanctions, but nothing more serious, because no species went to war over non-citizens anymore. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Back on Earth, in a war room that hadn't been used for actual war planning in nearly a century, humanity's leaders gathered and made a decision that would reshape the galaxy. The only question now was how much blood would be spilled before the lesson was learned. The ultimatum was delivered simultaneously to every Galactic Council member and broadcast on every frequency humanity could access. Return all captives within 72 hours, or face the consequences. Sarah stood on the bridge of the UHS Resolute, watching the countdown timer tick away with mechanical precision, while around her the crew prepared for something none of them had ever actually experienced: real war against an alien enemy. They're calling it unprecedented, Lieutenant Marcus Chen said from the communications station. No relation to the ambassador, but everyone made the joke anyway. 15 different species have sent diplomatic requests begging us to negotiate. What's our response? Sarah asked, though she already knew. The Secretary General told them all the same thing. There's nothing to negotiate until every human is free and every slaver is held accountable. Captain Rodriguez watched the tactical display where 7th Fleet was. In 300 years of spaceflight, we've never mobilized like this. 18 fleets, 4,000 ships, 500,000 Marines. We've never needed to, Sarah said quietly. The Zhen response came at hour 47 of the countdown, and it was exactly what everyone expected. A formal statement claiming that the salvaged individuals had been recovered from a derelict vessel in Zhen territory, and were therefore legally bound to labor contracts until their rescue expenses were repaid. Labor contracts, Rodriguez said the words like they tasted bad. My great-grandfather was born into a labor contract in the Detroit factory zones. Do you know what they called the people who enforced those contracts? Sarah did know, because her grandmother had told her stories that still gave her nightmares. Slavers. Slavers, Rodriguez nodded. And do you know what we called the people who fought to end the contracts? Heroes, Rodriguez agreed. So I guess we're about to find out if we measure up. The Galactic Council called an emergency session at hour 63, and Ambassador Chen attended via hologram because he refused to leave Earth while humanity prepared for war. Sarah watched the feed from the bridge, while pretending not to, and saw 200 species all talking over each other, trying to prevent what everyone knew was coming. Humanity must see reason, the Morthene delegate chittered desperately. The Zhen sovereignty has existed for 10,000 years. They have alliances, resources, military might beyond anything. They have slaves, Chen interrupted flatly. Or did you miss that part? The terminology is cultural. The reality is chains, Chen snapped, and humanity doesn't care what you call them. The Haravok representative tried a different approach. War will destabilize the entire sector. Trade routes will collapse, innocent species will suffer. Then the Zhen should return the hostages, Chen said. Hostages? The Zhen delegate's voice dripped with disdain. They are salvage assets, legally acquired. They are people. Chen's voice went very quiet and very cold. Human people who are traveling peacefully when your forces attack their ship. And you will return them, or we will come get them ourselves. The Zhen delegate actually laughed. You are one species among hundreds, young and arrogant and completely outmatched. Do you truly believe? 72 hours, Chen said calmly. You have 9 hours left. He disconnected before anyone could respond. Sarah found herself thinking about her grandmother during the last hours of the countdown, about the stories of the corporate wars, and the day the unification forces breached the Detroit factory zones. Her grandmother had been 20 years old and had never seen the sky except through filtration screens. Corporations said clean air was a luxury that contract workers hadn't earned yet. They came through the walls like angels, her grandmother used to say, her old eyes distant with memory. The Unification Marines, with their flags and their guns, and their impossible promise that we were free now, that we'd always been free and just hadn't known it. Did you believe them? Sarah had asked when she was small. Not at first, her grandmother admitted. I'd been property for so long, I didn't remember how to be anything else. But they were patient and they meant it. And slowly we all learned how to be human again. The countdown reached 0 at 1400 hours ship time. The Zhen had not responded to the ultimatum. All ships, Fleet Admiral Zhang's voice came through on the command channel. This is not a mission of conquest. We are not going to Zhen space to destroy them or rule them. We are going to enforce the law. The only law humanity considers universal. Non-negotiable. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. Every sapient being has the right to own themselves, Zhang continued, and anyone who denies that right becomes our enemy. Not forever, but until they learn. The Zen will learn today. The fleet engaged FTL drives in perfect synchronization. Through the viewports, Sarah watched stars stretch into lines as they punched through reality toward Zen space, and she thought about all the times humans had fought each other over this same principle. The corporate wars had killed millions, but ended with human slavery abolished on Earth. The Belt rebellions had killed thousands, but ended with worker protections that made contract servitude illegal throughout the solar system. The Mars liberation had killed hundreds, but ended with corporate personhood being permanently subordinated to individual rights. Every single time humanity had paid in blood to establish one simple truth: people were not. Contact in 30 seconds, Marcus called out from communications. Zhen Defense Fleet is positioning to intercept. Weapons free, Rodriguez ordered. Target military vessels only. Any ship broadcasting a surrender signal gets a Marine boarding team to check for captives. Sir, the weapons officer hesitated. The Zhen are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're saying we're committing an act of war against a sovereign nation. We know, Rodriguez said calmly. Send them our response. The message was simple and had been approved by every human government before the fleet departed. You took our people and made them property. We made one law about that. Now you pay the price. The Battle of Zhen Border Station Epsilon lasted 4 hours and ended with the station's garrison surrendering, after human Marines cut through their defenses like they weren't even there. Sarah led one of the boarding teams, and the first thing she saw when they breached the station's processing center made her want to burn the whole structure to ash. Humans, hundreds of them, lined up in holding cells being sorted by age and physical capability, while Zen overseers marked them with identification tags that designated their assigned labor duties. Free them, Sarah ordered, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Get every single one to the medical ships, now. One of the freed captives, a woman maybe 30 years old with fresh scars on her wrists from restraints, grabbed Sarah's arm. There are more. They told us there are 20 facilities like this across the border. Tens of thousands. Sarah looked at the woman and saw her grandmother in those haunted eyes. We'll find them. Every single one. I promise you that. The woman started crying, and Sarah held her, because that's what her grandmother said the Marines had done for her. Just held her and promised that she was safe now and would never be property again. By the time 7th Fleet finished securing the border stations, the other 17 fleets had begun hitting Zhen military targets throughout their territory, and the galaxy was watching in shock as humanity demonstrated exactly what they'd meant by consequences. In the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Chen stood alone at the human podium, with every species watching him, and said the words that would define everything that followed. We made one law. We told you all what it meant. The Zhen broke it, and now every slaver in the galaxy will learn what happens when you make that mistake. This is madness, someone shouted from the assembly. This is justice, Chen replied, and we're just getting started. The Zhen called their fortress world Kresh 4, and they'd never lost it in 10,000 years of warfare, against dozens of species who'd tried and failed to crack its defenses. Sarah stood in the briefing room aboard the Resolute, with 50 other ship commanders, watching Admiral Zhang outline the attack plan with the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing your enemy had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. The Zhen fight with honor, Zhang said, and several commanders laughed, because they all knew where this was going. They have elaborate combat protocols about appropriate engagement ranges and acceptable targeting priorities and ceremonial challenges before major battles. We fight to win, Rodriguez said from beside Sarah. We fight to win, Zhang agreed. And more importantly, we fight to free the captives. Intelligence indicates Kresh 4 has 3 major processing facilities holding approximately 50,000 beings of various species, including 5,000 humans. The tactical display showed the planet's defenses, orbital platforms, minefields, patrol routes that had been perfected over centuries of warfare. Zhang expect us to follow their protocols, Zhang continued. They expect measured engagement with withdrawal periods and formal communication. They're about to learn that humanity doesn't follow anyone's rules except our own. The attack began at 0400 local time, with human stealth ships dropping marker beacons throughout the Kresh system, while the main fleet jumped in at maximum range. The Zen garrison commanders sent the traditional challenge broadcast, a formal demand that the attacking force identify their grievances and prepare for honorable combat. Humanity's response was to broadcast on every frequency the Zen used. No sapient being shall be held as property. You have violated the only law that matters. Surrender now or face immediate assault. Then, they attacked before the Zhen could even respond to the message. Sarah watched from the Resolute's bridge as 7th Fleet hit the Zhen defenses with a coordinated strike that ignored every convention of galactic warfare. They didn't target military installations first. They targeted the power grid feeding the slave processing facilities. They didn't engage the defensive platforms at respectful ranges. They used relativistic kill vehicles to simply erase them from existence. They didn't withdraw to regroup after initial contact. They pressed forward relentlessly until Zhen ships were fleeing in confusion. "They're requesting parley," Marcus called from communications. "The garrison commander wants to negotiate terms." "Tell them we don't negotiate with slavers," Rodriguez ordered. "They can surrender unconditionally or die. Those are the only terms." The garrison chose to fight, and that was their final mistake. Sarah led a boarding team onto one of the processing facilities, and this time she was ready for what she'd find. But ready didn't mean it hurt any less. The facility was enormous, level after level of holding cells and workstations, where captives were being trained to serve Zhen households and industries and military units. "My God," one of the Marines whispered, "how long has this been happening?" "Too long," Sarah said grimly as she disabled the cell locks and watched thousands of beings stumble out into freedom. "But it ends today." They found humans mixed with dozens of other species, some taken recently from the New Providence, and others who'd been here for months after being captured from different ships. One of them was a young woman, maybe 19 years old, who stared at Sarah's uniform with desperate hope. "Are you real?" "We're real," Sarah promised, "and you're going home." "They told us no one was coming," the woman said and started crying. "They told us Earth didn't care about colonists, that we were expendable." Sarah pulled the woman into a hug. "Earth sent 18 fleets, 4,000 ships, 500,000 Marines. Does that sound like we don't care?" The Battle of Kresh 4 lasted 3 days and ended with complete human victory at a cost of 200 ships destroyed and 15,000 casualties. The Zen lost their fortress world, and more importantly, they lost the psychological advantage of being unbeatable. News of the battle spread through the galaxy faster than light, and suddenly everyone was reassessing their assumptions about humanity. In the Galactic Council chambers, species that had treated humans as naive newcomers started asking nervous questions about what humanity would do next. Ambassador Chen gave them their answer. "We will continue prosecuting this war until every human captive is freed, and the Zen sovereignty agrees to abolish all forms of involuntary servitude within there." "That's their entire economic system," the Mortheme delegates said in horror. "You're demanding they restructure their civilization." "We're demanding they stop enslaving people," Shen corrected. "How they restructure their economy afterward is their problem." The war expanded after Kresh 4 because humanity discovered something that made the conflict both simpler and infinitely more complicated. The Zen weren't just holding humans. They had millions of beings from dozens of species in bondage throughout their territory. Sarah learned this when her boarding teams started freeing facilities and finding captives from species she'd never even heard of. "These are Veilani," one of the freed beings told her through a translator, gesturing to a group of small furry creatures huddled in a corner. "They were taken 40 years ago. The Zen told their homeworld they'd died in an accident." 40 years? Sarah felt sick. The Zen have been doing this. This, for millennia, the being continued, taking small numbers from species too weak to fight back. Never enough to provoke war, but always enough to profit. That night Sarah sent a message to Fleet Command that changed everything. Request permission to expand rescue operations to all captive populations, not just humans. The response came from the Secretary General herself. Permission granted. The law doesn't specify humans. It says no sapient being. If we only save our own people, we're no better than the Zen. So humanity expanded the war. They created specialized units called breakers, small teams trained specifically to infiltrate Zen territory, locate processing facilities, and extract captives before Zen forces could respond. Sarah volunteered to lead one of these teams and spent 3 months running missions deep into enemy space. It was during the extraction of Facility Omega-7 that she found her cousin. She'd been going through the cell assignments methodically, checking every face against the database of missing persons, when she saw a name that made her stop breathing. Maya Okonkwo, missing for 2 years after her research vessel disappeared near Zhen space, presumed dead. Sarah ran through the facility calling her cousin's name, until she found her in a work detail, being trained as a technical specialist for Zhen military installations. Maya looked up when Sarah shouted her name, and for a moment didn't seem to recognize her own cousin. Then recognition hit, and Maya collapsed. Sarah caught her. "I've got you. You're safe now. You're going home." "Sarah?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "How?" 18 fleets, Sarah said. "We sent 18 fleets because they took our people and made them property, and humanity doesn't allow that. Not ever." They evacuated Facility Omega-7 with 4,000 captives, including Maya, and Sarah watched her cousin sleep in the medical bay during the flight back to human space. Rodriguez found her there at 0300 hours. "You should rest." "Can't," Sarah admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see more of them. More facilities, more people waiting for rescue." "We'll find them," Rodriguez promised. "Every single one." "The Zhen are falling back," Sarah said. "Intelligence says they're consolidating their forces around the core worlds, preparing for a long war." "Let them prepare," Rodriguez said grimly. "We made one law, just one, and they broke it. So we'll keep fighting until they learn." The war was 6 months old now, and humanity had freed over 200,000 captives and destroyed 60% of the Zhen military. But the cost was climbing. Casualty reports came through daily. Ships lost, Marines killed, resources depleted. Some people on Earth started asking if it was worth it. Sarah knew it was, because she'd seen what happened when humanity enforced its law. She'd seen beings who'd forgotten they were people remember how to be free. That was worth any cost. The war was 8 months old when 3 more empires declared their support for the Zhen sovereignty, and suddenly humanity wasn't fighting one enemy, but 4. Sarah sat in the strategy room aboard the Resolute, now her ship after Rodriguez fell during the Battle of Zhen Prime's outer defenses, watching tactical displays that showed human forces now spread across 8 sectors, fighting enemies on multiple fronts. "The Kavresh Dominion has committed 200 warships," Admiral Zhang's hologram reported from Earth. "The Thessian Empire sent their 3rd fleet, and the Korvax Union is mobilizing their border forces." "Why?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because we're winning," Zhang said bluntly, "and if we defeat the Zhen, it proves that their ancient empires can fall. Every species that's built their civilization on slave labor is terrified right now." "How many does that make?" "Intelligence estimates 40 to 60. Empires across the galaxy maintain some form of involuntary servitude," Zhang said quietly. "Most of them are watching this war very carefully." The Galactic Council was in chaos. Ambassador Chen attended the emergency session via secure hologram, because he refused to leave Earth while humanity was fighting what had become a galactic conflict. "You must accept the ceasefire proposal," the Mortine delegate begged. The Council has negotiated terms. The Zhen will return all human captives and pay reparations. And the other species? Chen asked coldly. The terms specifically address human grievances. No, Chen interrupted. Our law doesn't say no humans shall be held as property. It says no sapient being. We're not stopping until every chain is broken. That's impossible, the HFY representative rumbled. You're one species. You cannot enforce your will on the entire galaxy. Watch us, Chen said simply. What that meant, when human forces hit their border installations, after intelligence revealed they were processing captives for the Zhen. Sarah led the assault on Thessian Station Gamma, because she'd become humanity's most visible military commander, the woman who'd found her cousin in a slave facility and then kept fighting. The Thessians tried to negotiate after human ships breached their defenses. Sarah's response was broadcast across the galaxy. We don't negotiate with slavers. You can surrender and face justice, or you can die. Choose now. They chose surrender. The facility held 30,000 beings, mostly Zhen captives that the Thessians had agreed to process in exchange for trade concessions. Freeing them took 2 days, and during that time Sarah received a message that changed everything. It came from a small species called the Vrin, who lived on the edge of Kavresh Dominion space. We have been slaves for 300 years, the message said, in broken but determined human standard. We have heard what humanity does. We have heard about the law. Please help us. Sarah brought the message to Zhang. How many more like this are we getting? 17 in the last week, Zhang admitted. Species we've never heard of, all sending the same basic message. They're enslaved and they want freedom. Can we help them all? No, Zhang said honestly. We're stretched thin as it is. We've lost 800 ships and 100,000 personnel. Earth's population is united now, but how long does that last? Sarah looked at the tactical display, showing human forces fighting across multiple fronts. So we pick and choose who deserves freedom? We do what we can, Zhang said, and hope it's enough to start something larger. It turned out humanity didn't need to help them all. The broadcasts that human ships sent before every engagement, no sapient being shall be held as property, heard by billions of enslaved beings across the galaxy, and some of them decide to fight for themselves. The first uprising happened on a Kavresh world, where humans had freed several thousand captives 3 weeks earlier. The freed beings went home and told their people what they'd seen, told them that there was a species out there that thought slavery was wrong enough to fight and die to end it. A week later, the entire planet erupted in rebellion. The Kavresh Dominion sent forces to suppress the uprising, but the rebels held long enough for human ships to arrive. Sarah led the reinforcement fleet, and what she found shocked her. Thousands of beings, armed with improvised weapons, holding defensive positions against Kavresh military units. They need air support and heavy weapons, her tactical officer reported. Give it to them, Sarah ordered, and send a message to the surface. Tell them humanity stands with everyone who fights for freedom. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with the planet liberated and the Kavresh forces in full retreat. News of the victory spread, and suddenly uprisings were happening across 6 sectors. Species that humanity had never even contacted were rebelling against their masters and broadcasting messages asking for human support. This is spiraling beyond our control, Zhang said during a command conference. We wanted to free our people and enforce our law, but we're accidentally starting a galactic revolution. Is that a bad thing? Sarah asked. Zhang was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but we can't abandon them now, not after we gave them hope. So humanity committed to supporting the uprisings, while continuing to fight the Zhen and their allies. Resources were stretched to breaking point, but somehow Earth kept sending ships and supplies and personnel. Sarah's grandmother sent her a message during this period, a simple video that said everything that needed saying. "I'm proud of you," her grandmother said, her old face serene on the screen. "I'm proud that my granddaughter is out there doing for others what the Unification Marines did for me. I'm proud that humanity learned the lesson and didn't forget it." "It's costing us," Sarah sent back. "We've lost so many ships, so many people." "Freedom always costs," her grandmother replied, "but slavery costs more. It costs everything that makes us human. So you keep fighting, baby girl. You keep fighting until everyone knows they're free." The turning point came at the Battle of Gen Prime itself. Humanity brought 6 fleets to the Gen homeworld and broadcast one final ultimatum. Surrender completely, abolish all forms of involuntary servitude, submit to council oversight for enforcement, or we reduce your capital to rubble. The Gen Empress finally spoke directly to humanity after 8 months of war. Her message was short. "Do you care so much?" Ambassador Chen responded from Earth, and his answer was broadcast across the entire galaxy. "Because we remember what it was like to be property. We remember the chains and the quotas and the feeling of being treated like equipment instead of people. We remember, and we swore never again. Not to us, not to anyone." "You would destroy us over this?" the Empress asked. "We would end you over this," Chen corrected, "completely and permanently, because some evils are worth fighting to extinction." The Empress was silent for a long time before she responded. "We surrender." The war didn't end immediately because the Zen's allies kept fighting, but the momentum had shifted. Sarah watched from orbit around Zen Prime, as the Empress herself appeared on galactic broadcasts, announcing the complete abolition of all slave systems within sovereignty territory. "It is done," the Empress said, and she sounded tired. "Humanity has won. Their law will be our law. Chains are broken." Elevator. In the Galactic Council chambers, 200 species watched in stunned silence, as the ancient Zen sovereignty, 10,000 years old, restructured their entire civilization, because one young species refused to accept slavery. "What have we witnessed?" the Morthene delegate whispered. "Evolution," Ambassador Chen said quietly. "The galaxy just evolved." The Zen sovereignty collapsed from within over the following months. Billions of enslaved beings across their territory realized that freedom was actually possible and rose up to claim it. Sarah stood in what had been the largest processing facility in Zen space, a massive complex that had held over 1 million captives at peak capacity, watching the last of the freed beings board transport ships heading to their homeworlds. "How many did we free?" Lieutenant Chen asked beside her. "In Zen space alone," Sarah checked her datapad, 43 million sapient beings across 217 species. "And the allies?" "The Thessians freed another 20 million. The Kavrech are still fighting their own civil war, but estimate 60 million and counting. The Korvax Union dissolved completely, and we don't have solid numbers yet." Chen whistled low. "Over 100 million beings freed, because we refused to accept that our people could be property. Over 100 million freed, because we meant it when we said the law applies to everyone," Sarah corrected. The peace negotiations took 6 months, and were held on a neutral station, with representatives from every major empire in attendance. Ambassador Chen Wei led the human delegation, and his opening statement set the tone for everything that followed. Humanity did not start this war to conquer or humiliate the Zen and their allies. We started it to enforce one simple principle: beings are not property. We will accept no treaty that doesn't enshrine this principle as galactic law. "You cannot legislate morality for the entire galaxy," the Kavrech delegate protested. "We're not legislating morality," Chen replied calmly. "We're establishing that slavery is a crime against sapience itself. How you structure your societies beyond that is your business." The Zen Empress attended the negotiations in person, history, and on the 3rd day she asked to address the assembly. "For 10,000 years my people built our civilization on the labor of others," she said, and her translator captured the weariness in her voice. "We told ourselves it was natural, that some species were meant to serve while others ruled. We believed this so completely that we never questioned it. She looked directly at Ambassador Chen. Then humanity arrived and said no, said it so loudly and with such absolute conviction that it shattered everything we thought we knew. You didn't just defeat us militarily, you defeated the entire philosophy that justified our way of life. Good, Chen said simply. I don't know if my people can survive this transformation, the Empress admitted. Our economy was built on slave labor, our culture celebrated ownership. How do we become something different? The same way every species learns, Chen replied. Slowly and painfully and with help from those who've done it before. Earth will send advisors if you want them, people who know how to rebuild an economy without slavery, people who understand what it's like to transform a civilization. Why would you help us after what we've done? Because the goal was never to destroy you, Chen said. It was to free everyone, including you, from the system that made you think owning people was acceptable. The final treaty was signed 3 weeks later. Every empire that had fought on the Zhen side agreed to the same basic terms: immediate abolition of all involuntary servitude, reparations managed by freed populations themselves, council oversight to ensure compliance, and adoption of humanity's universal law as galactic standard. Species that refused to sign found themselves economically isolated, as dozens of empires that had stayed neutral during the war announced they would only trade with civilizations that respected sapient rights. The cost of the war was calculated in the aftermath, and the numbers were staggering. Humanity had lost 2 million personnel, military and civilian combined, and 3,000 ships destroyed or damaged beyond repair. But 40 billion beings across hundreds of species were free, because humanity had meant what it said about their one law. Sarah returned to Earth 8 months after the treaty signing, and found a planet transformed by what they'd accomplished. Her grandmother met her at the spaceport, 90 years old now, but still sharp as ever. You did it, her grandmother said as they embraced. You actually did it. We did it, Sarah corrected. All of us. Everyone who fought and died and refused to accept that slavery could ever be normal. They walked through the memorial gardens that had been built to honor the fallen, and Sarah saw something that made her stop. The memorial wall listed every human casualty from the war, but at the center was a different monument, a simple stone, carved, with names of beings from every species that had died fighting for freedom. We wanted to remember all of them, her grandmother explained. Not just our people, but everyone who fell, because the law doesn't distinguish between species. Sarah traced her fingers over the names, human and alien alike, and felt the weight of what they'd accomplished settle over her. 3 months later, she was summoned to a formal ceremony at the reformed Galactic Council. The council had been restructured with humanity's universal law as its foundation, and today they were voting to grant humanity permanent council leadership. Sarah attended in her dress uniform, now bearing the rank of admiral after Zhang retired, and listened as Ambassador Chen addressed the assembly. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy, Chen said. We never did. We just wanted to live in a galaxy where the most basic right, the right to own yourself, was protected. You've given us that, Morphine delegates said, and there was genuine gratitude in the chittering voice. Our own enslaved populations have been freed, populations we didn't even acknowledge existed because we'd convinced ourselves the system was normal. 40 empires have signed the Universal Rights Charter, the Haravak representative rumbled, and 60 more are in the process. Within a generation, slavery will be functionally extinct in known space. Not extinct enough, Chen said quietly. There will always be those who try to bring it back, who see others as resources to exploit. Which is why vigilance is the price of freedom. A question that has haunted me. Ask, Sarah said. Why did you care so much? The warrior's multifaceted eyes showed genuine confusion. You could have negotiated for your people. taken compensation, maintained peace, but instead you started the largest war in galactic history. Why? Sarah thought about her grandmother and the stories of the corporate wars. She thought about finding Maya in that processing facility and seeing the moment hope return to her cousin's eyes. She thought about the billions of beings across hundreds of worlds who were free now because humanity refused to accept slavery anywhere. Because we remember what it was like, Sarah said finally. We remember what it's like to be treated as property, to have your labor stolen and your dignity stripped away. We remember, and we swore never again. Not to us, not to anyone. Even your enemies? Especially our enemies, Sarah corrected. Because if we only protect the rights of those who agree with us, are we really protecting the rights of anyone? People we like, then they're not rights, they're privileges, and privileges can be taken away. The warrior was quiet for a long time. My people will take generations to understand this. Then we'll be here to help, Sarah promised, because that's what the law means. It means we're all responsible for protecting each other's freedom. 50 years later, Sarah returned to Earth for the last time. She was 83 years old and had spent most of her adult life either fighting the war or helping build the peace that followed. The galaxy had transformed in ways that still amazed her. Slavery wasn't completely gone. There were still incidents in the frontier regions and occasional attempts to revive old systems, but it was rare enough now that each case made galactic news and drew immediate response. The Universal Rights Council that humanity had helped establish maintained rapid response fleets that could deploy anywhere in known space. Law. But more importantly, the culture had changed. An entire generation had grown up in a galaxy where slavery was simply unthinkable, where the idea of owning another sapient being was as alien as any of the species that populated the stars. Sarah gave a final speech to the graduating class at the academy, young officers who'd never known the old galaxy. You've inherited a better universe than the one my generation fought for, she told them, but that doesn't mean your work is done. Freedom requires constant vigilance, because there will always be those who see rights as inconvenient obstacles to profit or power. How do we know when to fight? One of the cadets asked. Sarah smiled. When you see someone in chains and you can't walk away, when injustice makes you angry enough to act, that's when you fight, not because it's easy or profitable or popular, but because it's right. The Admiral sounds like her grandmother, someone whispered, and Sarah heard it and laughed. My grandmother used to say that freedom's price is paid by every generation in turn, Sarah said. Her generation paid it in the corporate wars. Mine paid it against the Shen. Yours will pay it in ways we can't predict yet. But the cost is always worth it, because the alternative is chains. She died 6 months later in her sleep, and the galaxy mourned. But more importantly, the galaxy remembered. They remembered that humanity had looked at an ancient system of oppression and said no. They remembered that one young species had been willing to fight the entire galaxy to enforce a single principle. They remembered that some laws matter more than others. On 1,000 worlds, freed beings taught their children about the humans who came when no one else would, who fought not for conquest or glory, but for a simple idea that everyone deserved to be free. In the Galactic Council chambers, the universal law was carved into the walls in two. No sapient being shall be held as property. And beneath it, in smaller text, humanity's gift to the stars. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo's final log entry was preserved and transmitted throughout human space as her official epitaph. We made one law, just one, because we knew from experience that this was the only law that really mattered, the law that said people are not property. And we meant it. By God, we meant it. And the galaxy is better because we did. In the end, that was humanity's legacy. Not conquest or wealth or glory, but the absolute conviction that freedom was worth fighting for. That some principles were worth any cost, that when you see chains, your only choice is to break them. They broke the only law of the stars, and humanity made them pay in blood. But more than that, humanity made them learn.